I'll unmute myself there. Hey, everybody, welcome to Balticon 55. This panel is the Economics of Spacefaring Civilization, and I'm Jeanne Adams, your moderator. This is an absolutely amazing cast here to talk about this tonight. I would like them to introduce themselves, starting with the amazing CJ Cherryh. She would. Really needs no introduction, but.
CJ Cherryh, I have done quite a bit with economics in the Alliance Union universe, probably also in the Foreigner universe, and wherever else I've forgotten.
She's written enough books that she's forgotten, so that's great. Beth?
Well, I haven't written enough books that I've forgotten them, but this is a subject that interests me because the economics of how things get places really influences my world building. And I'm a writer from the DC Baltimore area.
Excellent, excellent. I didn't mean that the way it came out exactly. I'm sure that you have not forgotten your world. Jim.
Well, since I've got no worlds published, I have nothing to forget. The reason why I asked to be on this panel was because I'm an energy professional, and the energy of transportation and merchants is a very key subject. And I'm a licensed professional engineer who sometimes will admit to having an MBA as well. So it's always interested me in when I read these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that is fascinating about it is when you look at trade from our global Terran level, it's started, beads and coins and whatever, but when you take it interstellar, that's a whole different thing. So CJ, why don't you talk a little about in your worlds that you've created, how did you deal with how trade would look there and how important it might be in an economy, both Terran and interstellar?
Well, the one thing that can be transported and generated in deep space and transported to here is knowledge, intellectual property, that sort of thing. It's absolutely, massless, effectively,
right.
And it moves easily. So when I began my universe that relies heavily on trade, I have the very first thing going out is a gigantic pusher ship. It pushes basically a habitat, a station core, to in this case, to Barnard Star, and sets up there. And what the value of the ship is that it is a sublighter, takes quite a lengthy time to make a transit. Another thing makes the same transit, what they call the stream. It is in constant contact with the pusher ship. It's basically a beam that contacts the pusher ship crew, puts everything on there. Think of it as sort of like Facebook for interstellar travel. And everything they discover, everything they're working on, and they continually get an update from Sol system and also from their colony. And so it goes until they reach Earth. When they reach Earth, after all this time, there is another crew ready to take over their ship and go on. The ship's name is Gaia. Mm-hmm. And when Gaia reaches Sol system, they basically lock the doors and refuse to let anybody in because they're not giving up their ship. This is home. They are family. This is what they've become. And they're not breaking up. They're going to go another round. So the next crew has to wait on the commission of the second of the pusher ships because Gaia is loaded up and on her way back to the colony with supplies and such things as they will need. And that's the beginning of it all. It works like that for a lengthy time until they come to Pell's world, which is the first actually semi-habitable planet that is within their reach. But they colonize a number of star stations on the way, and they all are like that. The stream just gets more complicated. And a lot of what they transmit is completely informational.
Right. So they're
But,
trading on the information that they gain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we always talk about the information economy already here. So I can see how that would be an easy extrapolation to, as you say, it has no mass, but it's great value. So, Beth, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the notes that I had made before we started the panel was not only the intellectual property that CJ mentioned, but also things like art and music and literature, things that again can be shared without volume and at whatever speed you can transmit, versus things that are going to take generations or years to get someplace. So that was something I wanted to kind of think about out loud, is what are the things that don't take up space, if that makes any sense.
But have value. Yeah.
But have value.
Yeah.
And can be perhaps exchanged for other things.
Jim, your thoughts?
Well, if you're writing a story, I think one thing you need to do is decide what you want to be traded. And if you want mass things to be traded, you have to assume or propose that you have technology in your story that makes it economic, which typically means you need faster than light travel or some kind of Stargate maneuver system. Like David Weber, for example, he wanted large amounts of mass to be traded. So he has freighters that are 8 million tons. Now, compare that to the ships, the largest ships we have on our planet, the largest mobile structures we ever created, those very large crude carriers. They're 500,000 tons. So you can see he's scaling up a little bit. And as far as I know, David Weber may be going into double digits millions by now. I don't know. I've lost track of that part of it. But that's what he wanted. So he has to work backwards to the tech he has to have to make it economic.
Right.
Other systems that are like what CJ mentioned a minute ago, you have proprietary issues or copyright. You really can't transmit something in advanced technology and assume that people can't crack and hack your transmission. So you're almost going to have to hand deliver some things. So some science fiction writers like Moderator has that in one of his stories, where the people are bringing 3D templates and they actually have to hand the object to their customer so that they can enjoy the economic benefits of transmitting it and getting the revenue and copyrights for it.
Right. I mean, you would have to be mindful of that in writing that sort of thing as to whether or not that's something you could send forth. Now, the same applies to any kind of currency that you would use for plants or seeds or anything like that. If they're genetically modified, they've got a copyright. How do you think?
I was
sorry,
about
go ahead.
to say, one of the things that operates in my universe is printers. You can print just about anything.
Like three and 4 dimensional printers?
Yeah, beyond 3-dimensional printers, you can print anything you can get material for.
Right.
And so the transport of the raw material for the printer is a big deal.
And the design of the item
are a big deal. And then transporting, another big one is basic foodstuffs are components thereof. And that, of course, is one of the leading commodities until they get a planet that can produce it in abundance. Fiber, dyes, other things. I mean, things we take for granted.
Well, yeah, so many things that we take for granted that could either become currency, or we would have to figure out, a la, how big our shipping containers are, how to ship, and whether or not those things become a currency. I mean, there's so many things that I mean, like, I would never expected that toilet paper would have become a currency.
But if you look historically, things like spices and salt and things like that became currency because they were rare and they are relatively small compared to million-ton, tankers.
Right.
But it's something that people are going to value that are hard to replicate. But they may end up being currency, but they may not end up being worth anything when you get there.
And not every
Right.
star has metals.
Right.
You can be in an area where that's just not what happened. So
Right.
what your local solar system setup happened to have been, most of the stars that my folk use early on are red dwarfs. And they don't have the range of materials of, say, the sun. The sun is a very rich system, and these
Right.
systems aren't.
Right. And you can't count on a handy asteroid having the heavy metals you need either.
Yeah.
So I would assume too that asteroids would become, in certain systems, would also become currency if you can
Iridium.
catch them.
Iridium is very useful substance for modern technology.
Right. As that's where we're having such shortages with the microchips and.
But it's
From
abundant in asteroids, at least in this system.
Yeah. So how would we economically, and I'm going to start with you, Jim, on this question, how would we economically go about getting stuff off planet between the stars? And obviously that's going to affect cost of goods. So how are we going to, looking towards the future, how do you think we're going to start doing that sort of thing?
Well, first of all, I don't think we would probably be taking things off a planet and shipping them interstellar. Because we would probably be taking things from the asteroids or smaller gravity wells and taking them interstellar. But if you remember now, you have to have the tech to be able to do this. But you also need something rare, like CJ mentioned earlier. Some systems might be scarce in metal. One of the presuppositions is that helium-3 might be, H3 might be a source that could be traded. But I'm not sure that's true as either. You need something probably rarer than that. There's actually historical precedent for something very much like interstellar trading, and that was in the Bronze Age. They needed tin, but tin was very, very scarce. There is a lot of records where they obviously traded all the way from Syria to Cornwall, all the way
Right.
through the Mediterranean and up the Atlantic on ships, on very primitive ships by our standards today. And they're sailing quantities and how much they could carry. The voyages probably lasted as long as many science fiction writers will write Interstellar, where they have actually economic trade. And yet the tin did get traded. In fact, tin was so important for making a bronze, by the way. You needed a lot more copper than you needed tin. So tin was the limiting commodity.
Go ahead.
But so that is one of the things that they say made the collapse of the Bronze Age. There was enough disruption by the sea peoples that it interrupted the trade routes that were shipping tin around. And even if they just got rid of the sea peoples, you couldn't reestablish the trade routes. You didn't have tin, you didn't have more bronze, and everything collapsed.
Right. What were you going to say, CJ?
I was about to say, there's also the hand-to-hand route. Two traders need not to have met for them to have traded. So it goes from this tribe to that tribe to another tribe and so on. And it provides wealth along the route.
That's true. The spices are a clear example of that. You can show how various communities profited by this silk route and the spice route. But note that the more hands occupy something and the more you have uneconomical modes of mass transport, you have to have smaller and smaller amounts. So you end up getting back to ideas again at the extreme.
Right. Right.
And the more hands in the mix, the less that arrives at the end destination.
Right. And the higher the price usually. Yeah. One of the questions from the group is about using intellectual property or communication itself as the fundamental currency that powers the economy between systems, using the example of the Battletech universe, where the de facto reserve currency is a C-bill, which represents a millisecond of time on an FTL communication network. So what do you think about that, CJ, as communication technology as the currency?
Well, faster than light communication does not exist in my universe.
Mm-hmm.
Ships can move faster than light. but information can't move faster than they do. So
Right.
every ship carries a black box, and perforce hooks into the station system and spits up absolutely everything it knows into the station computer. So the stock markets react to that. Of course, the ship contains the total download of every station they have visited and every ship that has visited that station and all the stations they have visited. So when you publish, as happens in Citeen, there's a publication of a book called In Principio. And basically, it is kind of a rolling publication as the downloads spread from place to place to place. And at each point, credit is due, which also flows by the same informational route back to the creator.
So yeah, I mean, that's a perfect example of information as currency. Because
would
if
note
the
that
stock market,
There's
I'm sorry, go ahead, Jim.
There are historical examples of what CJ just said as well. The ships that were coming from Europe were frequently met offshore by people trying to get advanced knowledge of what events were and what the cargoes were in Europe, so they could get changes in the commodity prices. So a lot of times commodity prices would change and markets would change on the last few hours of a ship coming in, because they would be the first ones to have that knowledge. I bet in CJ's universe, if anyone can find a way to delay that information a few seconds and get it earlier, they could get a little arbitrage going with a lot of profit as well. Do you have that in any of your stories, CJ?
Well, yeah, it's a very, very big deal to withhold information at docking. It requires all sorts of acts of local Congress to forestall that download. And in the book I'm working on, we have two ships that are not in the system. They have refused to get the modern system installed, and that creates a little bit of a problem, tracking them for one thing. But it's indeed, if everybody doesn't play by the same set of rules, it creates an immense problem. And if somebody has found a way around the rules, or has gotten private information, which can happen, off individuals from a ship who have talked to somebody who has talked to somebody,
Right.
but it's not in the tape record. Why, there you are.
Yeah, and then you've got insider trading and all sorts of things like that.
Highly illegal there too.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions in the description was, how do you think we're going to manage first contact scenarios or trade with other races in the stars? Obviously, pieces of paper with dead presidents on them may not be the most valuable currency to someone who is from somewhere else. Beth, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that figuring out the communication with them so that we can figure out what we have, if anything, that's valuable to them. I mentioned in the chat that one of the things about trading on intellectual property and trading on things like art and music and literature is that you have to have some amount of context for those things. So if you're trading this, amazing poem, but nobody understands it, then it's not maybe worth as much as it might have been to somebody who has the context for it. So I think the first big challenge is going to be figuring out what do they want, and also, I hate to bring it up, but not repeating the mistakes that we've made here in Terra with sort of bad colonial experiences.
Right. What do you think about that, CJ?
I
Shiny rocks and pieces of paper, or intellectual property?
I presented another problem in the counter books, which we have a couple of races, the Ka and the Kun, who do not get along well with other species who breathe oxygen. And if you have to deal with the Kun, first of all, they speak in matrix. So you have to interpret everything they say in 5 different directions simultaneously because they have that many voices all going at the same time. Or actually they're portions of the message, and it is not very human, not very honey either, and they're just a bit of a mystery. You have a species that basically could board your ship, kidnap one of your crewmen, and leave you something odd in his place because they've sort of got the idea of trade, but they haven't really quite nailed that down yet. They're just interactions that you have. Then you have the bad behavior of the KIF, who managed, well, they figured out that the show were colorblind. They are very pastel people, and they were selling them things that clashed horribly and laughing about it. But you know, that, you know, the Chauner stories are somewhat humor. But indeed, what is trade? I mean, try to explain that to a culture that has symbolic value.
Right. Right. I mean, that's one of the questions that when you start talking about the economics of spacefaring is, what is the value you're trading? And what does someone else think about value that has nothing to do with what we think about as value? You know, Jim, I wanted to get your take on that too. Is, you know, what is your thought on shiny rocks and knowledge or paper or?
Well, Rebecca Orr covers this a little bit, and her excellent trilogy of Becoming Alien is the first book of it. Lithium is the medium of exchange that if you don't know what you're trading, you trade lithium, because lithium is universally necessary for high technology among all the technologies they have. But there's an honor system in place, which I don't know how feasible that is in her system as well. But I see the problem is going to be that if we meet a race of approximately our tech, there are going to be niches and gaps in our tech that they having theirs to match up with would be of great value to us. And the converse is true. It's going to be learning what is valuable and what's not. There's a short story in which a very advanced race has a device for almost like an anti-grav bike. And the humans want it, but they have no idea how they do it. And it turns out one of the humans notices that the surface of the bikes is kind of corroding. They don't understand the idea of coatings and paint. And so even if we were to tell them you could put stuff on it, we've got centuries of experience in how you go about coating materials to not have them corrode in unusual or unexpected environments. So we were able to trade them the idea of painting and coatings and all the experience we've had with it for the same technology for their anti-grav bikes. And both species are very happy with that. So it's learning where the holes are in the other person's tech base and knowing how you can fill it and trying to see what they have that can fill yours. So that's going to be a really key communications issue if we meet a similar technological race.
Right. That actually brings up one of the things about communication. One of the questions we've got is, what are your thoughts of the amount of time involved in the trade method connecting two stars as to the type of items traded? Would faster than light travel lead to more physical transaction, the shorter delay of time? I think that if we've got faster than light travel and we start meeting other people who are in our same level of tech, how are we going to keep that connection? I mean, obviously CJ's worked it out in her world where you have the info dumps at every stop. So how do we keep the market current on Earth if we're building a colony on Mars? What are your thoughts, Jim?
Well, are you talking real world, or are you talking about an author taking up pen and typewriter and word processing and making it work the way the author wants it to work? There's
either. Yeah.
There's really not going to be very easy to trade anything but ideas and information for how to make the 3D printers work better between Earth and Mars during the technology we have today. I mean, it's just too long to get there. Just the radiation exposure of anyone going there with our current technology is daunting by itself. So it's going to be ideas, things we can beam them, maybe even just controlling remotely equipment for them, that kind of thing. I personally believe if we do a moon mission, we ought to land pretty much robotic stuff,
Yes.
maybe people to start with, and then have them do things by telemetry. If necessary, have them orbit the moon, but it's very close to the Earth. We can have it from our orbit as well. As far as technology and exchanges, again, it's up to the author. You could have, if you want, and I think some authors have done it, where you have a space gate on the planet Earth and you just put a railroad through it.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not?
Yep.
The author's all
No,
powerful.
absolutely.
I mean, CJ, I can see CJ driving tankers through it. Why not?
The one thing that they do after the pushers, after FTL comes in and the pushers are like antiques, the pushers are still great for pushing iron. Where iron isn't,
Right.
and where iron is, robotic pushers can follow the same route and they don't age and get tired of it. So, you know, you have an endless stream of pushers moving goods of a great mass, and it is what it is. So there's no time limit on iron. You just, it gets there when it gets there.
And it doesn't degrade along the journey. So
Yeah, well, yeah, ideally, no.
Or expire.
or
Fire.
fire. Yeah.
Or pass
What are
out.
your thoughts, Beth? Yeah. What are your thoughts, Beth?
It got to me the one thing we haven't talked about trading, and maybe this is taking it on a little bit of a tangent, are things like air. Things that we need to survive versus things that we want to have because they make our lives easier or make our lives prettier or whatever. Things like air, and I mean, Jim mentioned earlier H3, but like, what about basic components of things that we need to, you know, survive?
Well, obviously those are going to be on high demand.
Well, for us, potentially not for other races. Are they going to have a way to replicate it that we don't have when we get out there?
Well, you're dealing with gases or elements, and a gas can be, of course, compressed, and it could be slow shipped, just like any other commodity. It doesn't need to go FTL as long as you have a steady stream of it. And the only thing that needs to travel really fast are time-sensitive things. So the problem being that if you are slow shipping stuff and it stops for some reason, you really have a problem in the end of the shipping pattern that has gotten to depend on it.
Right.
So
Yeah. If you
surpluses are a good thing.
I was thinking about this winter and the barge that got stuck
Oh yeah,
and stopped, backed up all the shipping for weeks.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
That's
and then
you can't get furniture in the United States. You're on a 6-month wait for it because of a stuck ship in the Suez Canal.
Yeah.
Right.
All your IKEA
amazing
belong to us.
amazing how interdependent we have become. It's a very small world. Jim, you were talking about the differences between whether or not you're looking at one type of colonization or another. Give us some further thoughts on what you were talking about there, about the two different, what you're looking at in two different ways.
Well,
Whether or not it's
if an author is taking a pen and pencil, I'm old school, and they're writing, and the author's writing a story. How far, if you write it in the near future, you're more constrained by the technology that we have today. So once you move the timeline further into the future, or into the past for that matter, but if move into the future, you have more options to presuppose you have better technological options.
Right.
So the more advanced you are technologically, the more options you have. Take what Beth said a minute ago about water and air. If you look at the commonality of things in the known universe, the most common element is hydrogen by the enormous percentage. But the third most common element is oxygen, which means that oxygen, which is what we need, and water, which we need, are not particularly likely to be scarce in most places in the universe. So lithium, on the other hand, is way down the list in what's available in the universe. So Rebecca Orr, I believe, was shrewd in her choice. Now, in terms of colonization, if a 3D printer facility has been installed already at a colony, and the material is there for the feedstock for the 3D printer, and the energy is there for the 3D printer, then it's the information that the 3D printer needs to work that will be valuable. But if you don't have the 3D printer, then getting a new 3D printer, if say one of them broke or busted or had an energetic event or a meteor strike or sabotage, anything like that happens, and that becomes the constraining point. If you've got 10 3D printers and 3 of them go down, it's not as bad. In my business, the nuclear engineer's mantra is redundancy is good, redundancy is good. Okay? So I give this out at conventions, so I'm kind of sorry I can't do that here. So all I can do is show it to you. I wear this on and I give it out at my presentation. But the more you always have to look for what the limiting factor is. And on Mars, it might be oxygen. But on the other hand, you may be able to process it out of the iron oxides that are there. Yep. Water might be it, but there's a lot of evidence that the caps have water, and there might be water subterranean. So the colonists may determine something completely surprising is it. Maybe, remember Protector by Niven? It turned out there was a particular element that they needed for their tree of life stuff to turn breeders into protectors. So thallium, that's right. Thallium is what it was. I just saw that and it pop up in the chat. Thank you, whoever that was. So you never know what's going to be limiting factor, but that will be what's valuable. Right. Mars needs women, right? Mars needs women. Isn't that the same? Maybe women will be the most valuable thing. They are on Earth. Why shouldn't they be on Mars?
Oh, there he goes. Now there he goes. So one of the things that somebody just put in chat that I found very interesting is that while carbon and hydrogen and oxygen are very prevalent, complex carbohydrates may not be. And since we need those to survive as humans, that might be something that becomes a currency.
Plants are one of the best engines we have for production of same. And my stations all have fish farms, among other things. Algae and fish are produced in huge orbiting tanks that water they got, iron they've got, steel. They can make a system that can produce protein using the light of the local sun to grow algae. And, it's algae cakes and fish cakes and whatever have you. It may not be too appetizing, but it will, it can be disguised as many different things.
Well, you can make tofu taste like just about anything, so why not fish cakes? But that actually goes...
Holds body and soul together.
Yeah, well, that actually speaks to your point, though, Beth, about the commodities of necessary things for survival. And that leads into another question that someone posted in the Q&A is wondering how space colonies would overcome a genetic bottleneck effect, and would part of what trading partners or space, people docking at your station would provide is a genetic diversity. What do you think about
spacers don't marry? They just sort of distribute their goodies along the way.
Well, I mean, it certainly happened on the Silk Road. So, we were talking just briefly before the thing started about several of us do genealogy research, and when you look at the diasporas, it's the traders who spread different genetics around the globe. So, I think trading people the question is, would trading people to maintain genetic diversity be helpful? I don't think we would want to trade people per se, but we might want to trade genetics. What do you think, CJ?
Well, all my ships are matrilineal. This is because they use their station calls to go mingle with other crews. And a kid may have 100 uncles and aunts, one mother, but he or she will grow up on the ship, and they will know that they had a father aboard thus and such ship, probably. They were in port at the time. It could have been any one of 20.
Right.
But that is the life they lead. And it's genetically healthy for the station. The station folk go slumming along Port Row. But
Which they're going to do anyway.
Yeah, but
Or at least one assumes.
it's not a good thing. So diversity, yeah, that's one of their functions.
What do you think about that, Jim?
I think ova and sperm are more likely. You can store them and keep them in a specific cold, and we've already been able to do that. The technology will only get better. Also, you can better shield them so they're not going to be exposed to radiation, whereas the people are harder to shield because they actually have to live. Whereas the ova and sperm can be kept in very small containers, very carefully protected and shielded. So I think if you're going to do that genetic diversity thing, I think practically it's going to be ova and sperm. I don't think zygotes, because there's a lot of ethical questions about taking a person that has no choice and having that person just show up someplace and grow up. But sperm and ova probably doesn't have the same ethical considerations.
Yeah, someone had put that, actually the degrees to which it had to be cold to, so in the chat. So what do you think about that concept, Beth? That's sort of an interesting trading item.
Well, yeah, and I think there are novels that have dealt with this conceptually. I mean, I'm thinking about Citizen of the Galaxy, which was old and delicious, but it involves how do we mix our populations so that we don't end up with a little too much of the Vikings or a little too much of whatever else it was. But I think Jim's absolutely right that the preservation of the genetic material is going to be much easier than the swapping of people, and much less ethically fraught than it might otherwise be.
As somebody posted in chat that you would end up with some extremely odd generational gaps, and I'm like, okay, don't want to have to track that. So one of the questions that just popped up is, brigands abound throughout the ages, no matter what the technology. Slow ships, especially robotic, would be susceptible to piracy, and space is vast. How do you protect that, and who pays for it? What are your thoughts, Jim?
The economics of piracy is pretty strange. You really can't make it work in the real world. You almost have to construct your storyverse so that it becomes economical. It costs so much to make a spaceship. It costs so much to operate it, and it's so trackable and traceable. I mean, you have to really work to make space piracy viable. Larry Niven came fairly close to it by saying that there are certain points where a spaceship will emerge from warp, and so the people would deposit themselves there and lay in wait, so they could cheaply lay on a base and then get in their ship and go up to the point when the ships come out. But that's about as close as I can imagine, and I would believe that any society that had that kind of a bottleneck would patrol it.
Right. I had some evolve, but they evolved as pirates almost always have in the history of Earth, out of wars. Piracy happens when a group of ships refuses to come in and sign the treaty.
Right.
It's happened in the ancient Mediterranean, in the Greco-Persian wars. Some of them were state-sponsored, but not all.
Right.
Cilicia, a little town right at the curve where Asia Minor meets the Eastern Med. Cilicia's national industry was piracy. They had a free port there, and in general, whenever we look at our era of, the Black Pearl and all that, that immediately follows a period of wars. In this case, there was privateering, paid preying on another nation's ships.
Oh, absolutely. And the British were notorious for paying pirates to sort of turn to the British side and prey on ships from around the globe. So
I understand Franklin was trying to recruit some as well. So
And getting back to Cornwall, the entire south coast of England spent much of the wars with France doing exactly that.
And the practice of wrecking, putting out false lights and steering somebody in, a false distress call, etc. There are ways that.
Well, it actually leads into a question that just popped up initially in chat, and then they brought it over to Q&A. Is even if old school piracy is unlikely, there's always going to be the cad, the salesman who's selling, quack medicines and get rich quick schemes. And how do you think that might emerge in a space economy, which is a great question. What do you think about that, Jim?
I need to see the phraseology of that question a little better.
It says, if old school piracy is unlikely, what get rich quick schemes might emerge in a space economy?
Oh, I see. Well, we just discussed one a moment ago, which is getting the information first. That is,
right.
You know how the information is going to come in. You find a way to get it first, whether you have somebody putting semaphore flags on the spaceship before it gives off the message electronically, or whatever it is, or you send a drone ahead of the spaceship that gets there sooner. An author with an inventive twist and wants to get there can get there. Just information technology is the easiest way to do it.
I have an invention which absolutely works, and it is perpetual motion. I swear to you, I have cracked it.
Yes. And you have the
I need investors.
Yeah, well, there's always, the Ponzi schemes and the investments and that sort of thing. If I just could have enough funding, I could make this, engine that's faster than light. You could just start with there.
Well, and investments on, if you think back to sort of Age of Sail, investments on trips that might or might not come back, or might or might not be successful, or might or might not be profitable when they got back.
Right. Did you find spices, or did you find gold, or did you find nothing?
Yeah. I brought back the seaweed. It's really nice.
Also, my folk have station shares. The stationers basically have a investment in where they live. And when you are born, you are entitled to a station share, and you don't want too many people born because, of course, that dilutes the shares. How big your share is depends on how long your family has been there, what they have contributed, and so on and so forth. So there's definitely social layering, and there are zones of extravagant wealth and just barely making it.
Right.
And there's always oh, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
There's always the thing about who survives the expedition to collect the benefits thereof.
Right. And something that popped up for me in my head as Jim was talking a few minutes ago is the economy of repair is going to be considerably more robust than it is on Earth, because if you're at the end of the supply line, as CJ was talking about, if you can repair it, you've got a job for life, right?
Repair, cycle, renew.
Right, as opposed to chuck it out the back and buy another when you can't do that. So the training of people who can repair things and the ability to repair things will be an economic boon too. We are getting our warning signs here. So let's take this one last question real quick. It says, how will the interplanetary government collect taxes to pay for the Space Force? That could be really interesting. How did you handle that, CJ?
Well, the original thing was funded by a scientific mission to another star. And the ships were funded, and it was sort of all the nations of Earth participating in what had become fairly profitable in Sol System type manufacturing trade, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If it's good here, it could be good elsewhere. Eventually, the big break with Mother Earth comes when, and I'm giving away nothing because I haven't written this story yet, when a band of people frustrated that they are not being allowed to proceed to Tau Ceti, which has a interesting planet. So they actually steal a station core and truck. It's a pusher, and it takes them a long time to get there, but you know, cops and sirens just don't work out there. So
That's true. And even if you paid your Space Force,
yep, and that's where the break happens between the publicly funded experimental things and the outright theft of an entire station core.
Right. Jim, do you have some quick thoughts on that before we go?
Yes, you have to figure out how your economy works. If you have any trade organization that stands to lose or gain, or if you have people who are afraid, or if you have bureaucrats who have a vested interest in getting some taxes, they will find a way. I was a regulator for 20 or 30 years of the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We never failed to find a way if we wanted a regulation. We never failed to find a way to enforce it.
Yeah. Beth, do you have some thoughts before we go?
I guess my sort of assumption is that interstellar organizations, A, will find a way, and B, are going to be a little fewer and farther between, because most of that kind of both enforcement and grift is going to be at the local level or at the system level, rather than necessarily at this more distant macro level. Yeah, because just because enforcement is going to be so hard.
Right. Right. I think that's really a great answer. Because we're short on time, let me ask you, Beth, to start and say where we can find you on the web and at the rest of the con, and then we'll move through.
This is my last panel for the con. I am at BT Musings on Twitter, and my blog and stuff is linked through my Twitter handle. Cool.
Jim?
Well, I don't have an author's thing because I don't have any published fiction at this point. My articles are generally can be read at Bain.com. The latest one is Recycling from Stars to Starships, which I have developed a presentation and gave it earlier in Balticon. You can find me on Facebook. If any science fiction writer, and some have, by the way, have a question on economics or the technology or how to make something happen, I'm always willing to help. And one guy asked me to design a nuclear sword, and I did.
Some sauce. And CJ, obviously you're still on panels at the con, so
this is my last one.
Oh, is it?
Yes, it is. But you can find me at www.cherryh.com. And the only thing is that thing, I think I last updated it in 2012. However, it links to Wave Without a Shore, which is my personal blog. And I'm also on Facebook, and I keep all my posts public so you can follow me easily.
Most excellent. And I'm Jeanne Adams, your moderator. You can find me at jeanneadams.com. And I spend way too much time on Twitter, so you can find me there at Jeanne Adams. Again, thank you so much to my panelists. What a wonderful and interesting panel to have been part of. And thank you very much to Balticon for having us here tonight.
And thank you to our fabulous tech person and our fabulous
Richard, thanks. Absolutely. We'll be over. Are we on? I think we're at Water Table if anybody wants to hang after at Water Table. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you, CJ.
Yes.
Thank you, CJ. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you all.